This is Scott Richmond
and Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 101.5 FM. Good morning, Arnie Sherman. How are you? Welcome back.
It's good to be back. I was in Panama for a week where it was 100 degrees warmer than it is here.
Is that right?
It's taking a little bit to get adjusted back to our local climate, and I'm excited about our show today.
Me too.
You know, we have Mary Bergstrom, who is a marketing guru. She wrote a book in 2012 called All Eyes East, Lessons from the Front Lines of China Youth Marketing. That book, by the way, in 2013 was named one of the top 5 marketing books of the year. So She's got a good handle on China. And as you know, I've spent a lot of time in China. I first went there in 1991.
Right.
And I can tell you there is a tremendous difference. It's not even like it's the same country anymore. Certainly in the major cities. It's not it's such a remarkable change. I mean, you go to New York in 1991, you go back now.
Right.
There's some change, but you can still recognize the city. Right?
This is completely different.
Completely different.
What's the biggest change?
I think the mentality. When I was going into China in the 90s, all of the local people I met with, businessmen, private citizens, would say things to you like, your country is so new. But look how we have so many old things. We have 5,000 years of history.
Right.
And they would focus on China as old being good.
This was in 91, right?
All through the 90s.
But it's amazing when you go there now, they tore down everything that was old.
They say now only new is good.
Right.
Look at this hotel. It's so new.
Right.
Why are you staying at that old hotel? It's very funny. I was in Shenzhen, and I was staying at a nice hotel, Ritz-Carlton. It looked good to me. And everybody was saying, no, that hotel's old. That was built 2 years ago. You have to stay at the new. They're all focused in a totally different way. And so I'm really very anxious to hear what Mary has to say about marketing, to young people in China. It's got the second highest percentage and gross number of people between 10 and 24 of any place in the world. They have now 269 million people in that demographic.
Holy mackerel.
In comparison to the United States has 65 million. So it's 4 times the size.
I want to know what media outlet is it. Well, obviously the internet and their mobile phones. They were on the mobile thing well before we were.
Totally. And where's the largest youth population?
In China?
No. China's number 2 in the world.
So where's number 1?
Yeah.
India?
Yes. India by far, actually. Even though they're not that far apart in overall population, the youth population in India is 356 million. There are more people in India between the ages of 10 and 24 than people in the United States.
Incredible.
So if you're a global brand, if you're a company, you have to. How could you not look at those markets? They're enormous. I mean,
great opportunity. China
alone is 19% of the total world's population in one country. You have to start focusing on it. And the other thing about mentality, I think the other change beside new being good versus old is I was just recently reading about Jack Ma, who our listeners probably know is the chairman of Alibaba, which is a Chinese version of like eBay, but on steroids. He went from a guy that was, pretty well much unknown 5, 6, 7 years ago to now he's worth $27 billion. And when he did his IPO on Alibaba, they raised $25 billion. I was just reading recently, Jack said, before I left China, when he was growing up, he's 52 now, but when he was growing up, he said, before I left China, I was educated that China was the richest, happiest country in the world. And then he said, so when I arrived in Australia, I said to myself, oh my God, everything is different than what I was told. And I think that's the other change. The Chinese tourism, the growth of a Chinese middle class has put them in contact with the rest of the world, and they realize they realize that some of the foundations of their thinking about life have been shaken, and they have a much more global perspective on things.
And it's only recent.
Yes, it's only recent. Do you know how recently, in 1991, and I know that seems like a long time ago, but in the history of societies, it's not that long ago.
Not at all.
The only place you could shop in a city like Beijing or Shanghai was a store called the Friendship Store.
Right.
Because it was the only one that was allowed to take foreign currency. Our listeners probably wouldn't know necessarily, but up until the early 90s, you could not exchange money. You could not use foreign currency, and the Chinese yuan was not changeable with other currencies. So if you got money to use there, it couldn't be used anywhere else. You couldn't exchange it anywhere else. And the only store where you could use a credit card or use any money was the Friendship Store. Now you go to those cities, and there's thousands of stores. It looks like any other developed Western
They're
city.
using credit cards like we are.
Right. And shopping malls, and every kind of consumer good possible. To me, in 20 years, from changing from one store in a city of 20 million where you could shop to thousands of stores is an amazing transition.
Great for advertising.
Right. So, how do you, and we're going to ask Mary this today, I think, how do you establish a brand in a country that large? How do you go into a country of 1.4 billion people, and in her case, focusing on the youth market, with 270 million people, and how do you get them to want to buy, Nike? Or how do you get them to want to eat, Kentucky Fried Chicken?
We have a lot of questions for our guest, Mary Bergstrom, here on What Do You Know? Proudly supported by Dawn Maddox, Glacier Sotheby's International Realty. Local Montanan Mary Bergstrom back after this. We are back with our guest, Montanan Mary Bergstrom.
Good morning, Mary. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Good. We're doing really good. We started talking a little bit about China before we got you on the air. Tell us, how did you migrate from being a fashion, entertainment, technology, brands, marketing person to focusing on the emerging youth market in China?
Good question. So I started my career in New York and Los Angeles, and my husband and I felt really comfortable. We were both in marketing, living in the U.S., and we were looking for a bigger adventure, a larger challenge. And so we sat down in front of my grandparents' cabin on Flathead Lake, and we brainstormed different places that we could go and different challenges that we could take up. And when we got to China, we just thought that would be a fantastic fit. We were adopting my daughter at the time, and I'd always been interested in China. And it's just it was such a big opportunity at the time.
And what have you found that is distinctive about the Chinese youth consumer appetite? I mean, you ended up focusing on that, and I'm going to ask you a two-part question. Why did you pick young people to focus on in China? And then what did you find unique about them once you did?
I focus on young people in China, so I'm going to reverse the order. I focus on young people in China because there were so many of them, and there wasn't a lot of good either qualitative or quantitative research that was being done. There wasn't a lot of great storytelling to help brands connect with them. And I felt that it would be a service both to the brands and to the young consumers to have someone bridge that gap. So that's where that focus came from. And then when I was kind of understanding more about Chinese youth and what really made them specifically different, because of course that's what, any good executive is going to ask. First of all, is where do I need to kind of tailor my strategy?
Right.
And so the first thing that they needed to understand is that young people in China are much more controlled than they are in other parts of the world, and that leads to different value structures. For example, young people in China, it's traditionally been more valued to be more obedient, more part of the family, more part of the network of your community.
Right.
Whereas, obviously, in the West, it's really valued to be an individual and to be independent and to rebel.
Right.
So those are huge values differences. And then in terms of consumption in general, young people in China aren't taught that it's bad to be a consumer, whereas in the West, people have kind of associated consumption with being maybe of a lesser moral fiber.
Sure.
Whereas in China, it's still a really great thing to know about brand and to know about consumption and to be a real expert.
Sure. Well, one of the things that our listeners maybe are not familiar with is, and you alluded to this, family integration and a more controlling environment, is that, as one of the consequences of a one China policy, which they've had for a long, long time, they've just recently eased up on it, is that every child has parents and 2 sets of grandparents, and so you have 6 adults who now, particularly during the last 10 or 20 years, who have gained a lot of financial viability, have only one child to lavish that on, and that really has, to me, made a noticeable difference in consumerism as it's implemented in China.
Absolutely. And it has to do with, consumerism in terms of, like, what are they interested in buying, what are they able to buy, and then also what do they need to buy. There's such a big gender imbalance in China that to woo a bride, you really have to come and bring it. You have to have a house, and you have to have it decorated, and you have to have a great job, and you have to have, citizenship in a really good city. So there's a lot of responsibilities that go with that.
I've noticed
opportunity.
that family celebrations that I've seen, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, are much more lavish. It's almost like it's Vegas every day there when those events are taking place.
Yeah, it's really over the top. And I heard of some young couples who will bring, the mother-in-law along with them on the honeymoon.
Right.
So it's really a question of it's really not just for you.
Right. It's a family event. Do you think, as your experiences, do Chinese youth prefer foreign brands over domestic brands, or how does that balance out?
I think that definitely used to be the case, but I think that is changing, and I think that you can definitely foretell that will change anytime that there's some friction, politically speaking. So Chinese youth are really nationalistic, and if there is some kind of a political issue, then they will defer from buying.
Sure. I've seen some folks comment here, in the U.S. that a lot of the Chinese young people that they come in contact with that are in high school and college seem to not only be consumer focused, but I've often heard the word spoiled being associated with them. Is that something that you would echo or not?
I think the word spoiled is a tough word because it definitely comes with connotations and value judgments that come from the West.
Right.
So, what is spoiled? I mean, does it mean that somebody has a lot of attention? Then absolutely, they are, quote unquote, spoiled. Does it mean that, somebody is not able to do what they need to do because they have more attention than maybe, their cohorts in countries with more kids? No.
No, but I do think, and I've even noticed it in interns at universities and interns at companies, that the Chinese, young people that are here, are focused on a lot of brand connection. I mean, Louis Vuitton. I mean, you see a lot of upscale connection with them. In New York, so a lot of Chinese young people driving, Ferraris and living in expensive apartments, which were not equivalent to most of their peers that they would be dealing with in the U.S.
They're Anglo peers.
They're Anglo peers, right.
Well, that makes sense. Let me ask you a question, Mary. What are some of the brands that are really connecting with the young people in China? Some of the Western brands?
That's a really good question. I think that it's really hard for Western brands to keep up with young people in China. I think that changes all the time. I think that Apple has a good position just because there frankly isn't a lot of competition, but brands like Xiaomi, which are domestic, probably would infringe on that market share.
Okay.
Is there a bit of a herd mentality that when I know it's a hard market. I mean, you got gateway cities, you have coastal cities, you got 270 million young people. But is there the thing where if iPhone 7 is out, everybody wants one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's really, this is specific to technology as well.
Right.
Because there aren't a lot of competitors in Apple's space. If there were more competitors in Apple's space, then, that would be a different story. So, for example, for, cars, there's a lot of great cars that you can get in China.
Right.
And obviously the import tax is enormous, but for many, many people that doesn't deter them.
Correct.
But there's still, a lot of different kinds of cars that you can kind of gear towards. And I think that really in China, the styling of your different brands and the styling of your different hobbies and your different passions really helps to individuate you.
Huh. Interesting. I remember when traveling to China back in 2009, we were talking to, we were in Shenyang, which we talked about, Mary. It's north. And they were putting a BMW plant in China. And there were two options. You could buy an import, a German import, and spend X. Or you could buy the
local produced same engineering for much less. And it was just interesting to see the investment going on there. Right. Well, Buick has a huge plant that they produce, the Buick Shanghai in Shanghai.
Is that right?
For the local market. Yeah. So there's
no Buick Enclave, huh?
There probably is, but they don't manufacture it there. Directly.
They don't call it the Enclave.
So
which was a great. I went for a meeting over there, and to get there, I had to take almost like an electric pedicab.
Well, the traffic is outrageous. I mean,
where were you, Mary?
Shanghai.
Oh,
yeah. It makes San Francisco seem like you're in, some rural part of Montana.
Oh, San Francisco's quaint.
Yeah, compared to that, I know.
Yeah.
So how do you break a new product into a market that large? I mean, do you do it regionally? I mean, it's kind of hard to introduce a product to 269 million people over that entire space, simultaneously.
No, you can't. It's impossible. You have to find a niche.
Right.
And I think that's what, where a lot of brands have fallen on their faces is when they don't understand that you have to be even more targeted in China than you are about your market here.
Yeah, the initial reaction always is that you don't have, if I could just sell one toothbrush to each kid, it's the worst.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
the worst.
It feels viscerally like maybe that's an easy thing, but it's not. It's what you have to do there is counterintuitive in terms of trying to break into the marketplace.
Yeah, that thing, if I can just get a fraction of that market. There's that one, and then the other one that I really cringe at is I have a cousin or I have a nephew that is the same age in X country. I'm sure it's not very much different than what he's into.
Right, and that's not true.
So, I mean, there's just different factors. There's nuances that either make you a winner or a loser. So it's all about storytelling. It's all about how do you really understand who your audience is and what their values are, and how do you connect who you are and what you have to offer that's unique and differentiated.
And where do Chinese youth go to find out what they ought to be buying?
Where do Chinese youth go to find out what they ought to be buying? Is it off the
internet? Is it by watching TV? Is it reading magazines? Is it a mixture of it? It's everything.
Everything.
Well, their media...
they're so well traveled.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I was in Paris and I was observing at a Louis Vuitton store. And besides the fact that there was like a bus parked across the street of Chinese consumers, at the cash register there were... not literal cash register.
Yeah.
They don't have like a Hello Kitty calculator out or anything.
Right.
But they had two different groups, and they were looking online, and they were texting with their friends and on WeChat, making sure that they were getting the best price,
right,
the best selection, and the most up-to-date unique pieces.
Yeah, that resonates very much. And the funny part is you mentioned WeChat. I'd say most of our listeners have no clue about WeChat, and that's the way
I love WeChat.
Every Chinese person that I know communicates.
You know what, Mary, I thought of something. We should bring you back when you come back to Montana this summer, okay? We're going to put you in front of the Destination Missoula board and all the hoteliers who are ill-prepared for the onslaught of Chinese tourists. You're laughing, but it's true. We had this conversation yesterday. They're not prepared culturally or...
And they're everywhere. I mean, I just came back from Panama. There were dozens of tour groups walking around Panama on different days from China.
But these markets aren't necessarily prepared for what they're looking for, what they're looking for dietary wise. And
how to deal with it.
And how to deal with it.
And how to deal with it in a way that you can manage the traditional tourists and the local population and the incoming population.
Sure. We're going to send them for Chinese food.
Well, no comment.
Yes, you do, Mary.
If we have that conversation, I'm going to need to have Bernice's with the cream cheese croissants. I don't know.
That's right.
I don't know which health code busted them on that, but I am unamused.
Let's do a quick ID. You're listening to What Do You Know on KGVO. Our guest is Mary Bergstrom. We are proudly sponsored by Dawn Maddox, Glacier Sotheby's, International Realty, Arnie.
So when a company comes to you and wants to introduce a brand into the marketplace, what's the first kind of 2 or 3 things that you either alert them to or warn them about?
Well, let's figure out who their competition really is, because the competition that they could be prepared for and familiar with in their current markets may not be the same as what's over there. And then who is your consumer group? And then what are the brand assets? And that includes the brand story that you have to play with.
Right. And don't you have to have a local partner in a lot of it, in a lot of the businesses?
You have to have something set up on the ground.
Right.
And that can be a partnership. But I think that you could probably, spend a week hearing horror stories about that.
Yes. Well,
it has to be a strategy that is more rigorously created than any other strategy you've ever had.
Well, and not only that, but there has to be a recognition of that it's going to take a lot more time than you're probably used to here.
Yes.
Let me just share one story with you. So I was on a trade mission. We took a trade mission to China, and there was a member of the delegation who was a U.S. congressman, actually, and we were hooked up for a day with a Chinese entrepreneur who was looking to do some real estate, maybe in the United States, and he owned his own golf course and was building a huge real estate empire in China. It was reputed to be worth, hundreds of millions, huge amounts of money. Anyway, we go meet him, and we end up having breakfast with him, and then he asks us to play golf, and we play golf with him, and then we have lunch with him. And later in the day, we've already been with him since 7 in the morning. It's like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we had not discussed business. And the congressman finally said to him, Mr. Mao, I understand you're interested in real estate in the United States. Is there any way that I can be of assistance? If there's something we could possibly work on together, I would love to do that. And he looked at the congressman and said, I don't know you yet.
Yes.
Oh, hey.
Yes.
And that's surprising. But here, if you spend 8-10 hours with somebody, you're already going to call him your friend, right?
Right.
And a person in China after 8 or 10 hours isn't your friend yet.
Not at all.
No.
And you don't know them at all. And I would say that that's actually reciprocal, because if you think that you know him, you're crazy.
Right. Right. There's no possible way you could even understand how things work or operate, or how their particular business niche fits into everything else, because there's so much as these triangulated relationships, and as you know, the legal system there is not as strong and as diligent as it is here, and so
it's different.
It's totally different, and so all of that.
So, there's no schmoozing over there, is there?
No, there is a lot of it, but it's much more. I think America. It's a different kind of structure. Our transactions, we're a transactional society here.
Yeah,
and that's
true.
a relationship society.
Mary, how often do you travel there?
A couple of times a year. I've only been back for a few years, so there hasn't been, a real routine set up.
Okay.
But I would say that, in terms of what you were saying before with the relationships, I think that that's something that brands are really not fully committed to. They don't understand that, when you come in, things aren't going to go your way.
Right.
Right.
Doesn't matter how big you are. Doesn't matter what your name is. I mean, lots of people learn that experience in China, including Walmart, for example. Learn that experience.
I mean, name it.
Yeah. They all think the power of the brand that here
right.
that it can operate the same way, and it doesn't.
But isn't it important when you're doing business in China, and this question's for Mary, to be presented by somebody that has some currency and has some notoriety? Because doesn't that kind of get you at least a level of, not acceptance, but, okay, I know that you're a friend of so-and-so, so I'll work with you.
It's very important to network.
Right. And
it's very important to network, and it's very important to be respectful, and I think it's also very important to be flexible in terms of how you communicate and in terms of what values you present in what order. For example, like you were saying earlier, America's a very transactional society, and especially, Montana, home state, it's very much you are what you say. You do what you say. So there's none of the nuance and the flattery and you just get down to brass tacks. And in China, you have to have that cosmos of support around you to make things actually run.
Right. Yeah, it's a very hard thing for people who have done mostly domestic work, or even worked in there's some other markets that are more similar.
Right.
If you worked in Canada, for example, or UK, or Australia, New Zealand.
Who doesn't like the Canadians?
Right, who doesn't like the Canadians? Particularly with Justin running things up there. But in China, you have this need. It's not a need. It's a cultural, requirement that you have to take time and build relationships.
Well, so Mary, doing what you're doing in San Francisco, you are from Montana, which
yes,
I was struck by that. I told you I followed Mary. There's something about
He's
Mary.
A stalker, by the way. So just you have to take that into consideration.
There's something about Mary when I saw you.
There's a movie with that title, by the way.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
Well, the documentary
based on my life.
Based on her life. We have so many thoughts that come up when I think about that. But the thing is that the movie Looking for General Tso or Finding General Tso, Mary's in it for a half a millisecond, talking about Montana Chinese food.
Yeah.
So then I sought her out, and I said, "Are you from Montana?" Because I couldn't tell from her LinkedIn.
Right.
Indeed, she is. Tell us about your Montana upbringing.
Finally.
Yeah. relate to our audience in another way.
Finally. Yeah, that's what we're all excited about. So everybody turn up your radios.
Yes.
Can you hear?
Now you can pay attention. Yeah, I am from Missoula, and my grandparents, Leonard and Steve Bergstrom, my grandmother's nickname was Steve, helped raise me with my mom, and I have a lot of affinity. I have multiple shout-outs to do.
Okay.
Because I have such a close relationship with my Montana friends. So a shout-out to Vera, a shout-out to Jamie, to Frank, to Charlie, to Casey, to Sarah with an H, Sarah without an H. Josh, I'm sure I'm missing somebody. Catherine.
Give them some last names. I mean, this is like Romper Room.
Oh, do you need the formality for this show?
No, we do not need the formality.
You have like a certain
busting
level
your
that you're trying
chops.
to
We're just
maintain?
giving you a hard time.
Giving you.
So when you're not here and you're in San Francisco, what do you miss about Missoula besides your friends?
Besides my friends, and obviously besides, I'm a little bit bitter about those cream cheese croissants.
Right, I can tell that.
Exactly. I love that you're able to, ride your bike around town.
Right.
So, I took my kids there, Haya, Scarlett, and Hailey, and it was really fun to have them just be able to ride to the university. My son is 6, and, crossing traffic, I wouldn't really let him do that here. We went for a float down the river, so I love just the independence of it. I miss the beautiful mountains and the blue sky. It's shocking. It's still a bit of a bummer to go camping or to go on a hike and run into people. So I miss those things about.
You wouldn't miss
love
the
the smell
fact
of butterfly herbs.
You wouldn't miss the fact that in the last 2.5 weeks, this is the first day it's been above freezing, however. It's been very cold here. I know, it is part of it.
I remember being a kid and being, literally frozen out of my house. I couldn't get the door open because the door was frozen shut.
Yeah.
A real winter.
So that's part of the Montana story. You know, there's that cowboy mentality. You can live through this, which, you know, obviously doesn't speak to me complaining about the cream cheese croissants a minute ago. But
No, but
yeah.
Mary, now, isn't it interesting when you're traveling around San Francisco and you see all the hipsters with their beards and their funky haircuts? It's all originates here from Montana.
Yes.
Right? You can go into Murdoch's and pick up something for $20. It's $180 over in San Francisco.
That's right. There's a business opportunity for you.
I know.
So let me flash forward for a second, Mary.
Wait. She was going to say something.
Let me finish. Okay.
Well, Mary,
finish up.
Did you have something else?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, you know, the idea of, like, you know, finer thread count sheets, that's something that's relatively new to Montana. And so the idea of rough cut flannel, you know, being kind of spiced up and sold over outside, it's not a big surprise.
No.
It's an interesting trend.
Yes.
It's funny, for sure.
Yes.
You probably have 1 million of them.
So let me flash forward. You live in Montana, you live in San Francisco, you live in New York. Now you're living in Shanghai. What's your daily regimen like?
Well, she did
there?
live in Shanghai.
Yeah.
Oh, Shanghai was awesome. I would wake up, get on my scooter, go to a meeting, and that would either be, you know, at my office or that would be out and about at different locations, and some of those would be, you know, because part of the job is just being on top of trends. So going to art museums or going to meet with young people or going to a university, and just doing that all day long and taking pictures, meeting with photographers, meeting with clients, doing education and outreach just to help people kind of understand a little bit more about who consumers are and what trends are. And so that was with universities and different groups as well as brands and businesses.
And when did you decide to take some of those experiences and put them in a book? A book, by the way.
Nobody else wrote the book.
You know, a book, by the way, that I mentioned before you came on, that was in 2013 was picked as one of the top 5 marketing books of the year, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a treat. That was a real opportunity. That was a real gift. I love writing, and so that was A+. But I wrote the book because nobody else did, and I came in, 2006, and I was waiting for the book, and nobody wrote it. So I looked around and realized, there's not that many people that can write it, and it needs to get done. So let's do it.
Wow, that's great.
So is there an opportunity also to help Chinese companies figure out how to market in the United States?
Good question.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an opportunity. And then also, I work with companies in other countries, not just China or in the U.S. as well, to try to target Chinese consumers. Yeah,
is there a particular region where they come from? I mean, is India interested in targeting Chinese, or is it coming more from Europe? Where are the areas that want to target that you've been working with? Well,
there's a complicated relationship with India and China.
I know that. That's what I was asking.
And there are probably people that I partner with that might be better suited to that. But Europe and other parts of Asia, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, there's a lot of markets that, I do a lot of work with Europe that benefit from understanding more about Chinese consumers. But, in the U.S., I also do work with local consumers and local trends.
Right.
So it's not just about China for me. It's also about, basically my job is to be empathetic and to create a relationship through storytelling. And that can be done with any group, any place.
So give us an example that you can share that is not, proprietary, that how that worked for you.
So, for example, if you are a company and you're launching a new product and you need to understand a little bit more about, how do women, for example, even view your category. So if you're in sports,
yes,
you have to figure out, do women view sports the same way? Do they even engage in sports? So what is your entryway? So you need to understand, how do they live their general lives? How do the different values that sports can hit on really impact them? So, for example, being in shape, is that important to them? Feeling like part of a team, is that important to them? Feeling good about your body, what does that mean, or what does that look like?
Right. Is winning important, or is it just the experience?
Right. And then, you have the whole social aspect that's critical in China as well. So you have to figure out, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then how can your brand reach out? And in some cases, it's going to have to be a longer term proposition. How do you help to create a bridge from your brand, or how do you help to nurture a bridge from the young consumers to what it is that you're interested in selling?
You use the word storytelling a lot. How do you tell these stories in those markets in China? Like, what media do you use? Everything
at my disposal, and I think that that's something that was really underutilized when I was there, because I'm a very visual person, and so I would do a lot with video and do a lot with imagery and do a lot with, different demographics in a box. So really helping clients to come and go on ethnographic visits where you go into consumers' homes, and then also, create packages for them to experience what that consumer is experiencing when they get back to the office. And then also, just having compilations of different kinds of music and having different opportunities to engage with consumers in a way that consumers will actually open up and talk to people as people.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how hard is it to get into a private home and to do this sort of work there?
Really hard.
That's what I thought. I mean, they're very private about that. It's usually considered a big honor if you're invited to somebody's home.
Yeah, it's a big proposition. And then, it's not only about the incentive to get in the home, but how do you get people to really tell you how they feel? And how do you get them to imagine how they could feel?
Right. I mean, because you forget that it's still a communist country, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly with parents and grandparents, they still are a little bit hesitant to be completely open, about their feelings and beliefs and thoughts about things.
Yeah, and having people in your home, there's not a big, culture of entertainment. There's not a lot of, going over to friends' houses for dinner.
No, they go out more.
There's not a lot of cocktail parties, exactly. So, there's that you kind of have to be really respectful of. I feel like, you're on sacred territory. You're being a representative. You're really trying. I think that you have to go in with the right intention.
Right. I think a lot of that has to do with just the simple fact that space is at such a premium. Right. That they don't have a lot of space, and a small home in some of their minds may reflect maybe they're not as well off as they should be. And so it's so much easier to meet someone somewhere else.
Well, the other question I have is with television. How many? They don't have a ton of channels over there. Is direct mail valuable there? Is that viable there?
No.
Right. So how does it differ from the United States? What are the principal outlets to reach youth?
Well, it's so much word of mouth.
Huh.
It's so much word of mouth. So, it's about creating ambassadors. It's about really understanding what is going to be your value proposition and starting off with something that's going to be really unique and special from the get-go.
Right. So a product that has an interesting brand they want to introduce may have retired ambassadors in schools, different schools, right? And to get them to show off the product or wear it or share it with other people.
Well, so much of the academic environment is controlled because they have uniforms.
Yes.
So it's really not about having somebody in a specific location as much as it is really understanding what your niche group is and knowing who the real trendsetters are and the tastemakers in that group.
Right.
And having them giving them access to really positive experiences and
Right.
giving them access to really positive content that they can share across social media platforms and they can share in person.
Mary, back in the day when we used to market music, when there was a CD and an album market, right?
Mm-hmm.
We used to do things like mall tours and have bands show up in malls and perform their 2 hits, and all the kids would come in this environment, in this shopping.
Mm-hmm.
Do things like that happen in China as well?
Not as much. Public spaces are much more controlled in China, so that would really be a limiting factor. But there are a lot of festivals. There's a big, festival culture that's coming up in China. I think that, there's definitely opportunities. There's definitely venues. It's a question of how do you really be unique instead of just being the brand at the booth that you're going to see next to all of the other brands at the booth showing all the same kind of, cool images. How do you really speak to somebody? How do you really find out what the connection point is?
And you find that out by, talking to them, right? I mean, essentially.
Yeah.
Do they do sampling, though? Do they do things like sampling and, give the
products away?
This.
Yeah.
So they give them stuff. So it's with the perceived value that I'm getting something, so I'll start talking about it.
Right. Like they used to give cigarettes away on the street.
Yeah.
So you can get addicted to that. What's the biggest surprise you? You live there. You're working in this area. You're doing this, consumer and personal research. What was the biggest, most surprising thing you learned?
Oh God, there's so many awesome surprises. I think that what living in China did for me is it just expanded my horizons. Before, I think in the U.S., growing up here, and I lived briefly in Europe, I think I felt like I had like a 360, and having spent, almost 8 years in China, I think there's like a 3,600 degree view.
Sure.
I mean, it's so much bigger. For example, just seeing what happened with the Olympics or what happened when, just nationalistic consumer sentiment.
Right.
Against France or against Japan. I think that was amazing to see. I think, when you look at some of the crazy stories that have happened with the, with brands becoming caught up and mixed up with unfortunate stories about, how they're made or where they're made or how they're brought to the market. Fake alcohol, for example. That's
right. Or baby pablum or whatever.
Yeah. Or then you'll have a dog that will be worth, the most expensive dog in the world, worth millions of dollars. The next thing you know, that dog's homeless. So just how quickly things shift, and China becoming, they are constantly evolving. We're
going to go to a quick break. You're listening to What Do You Know with Scott and Arnie. Our guest is Mary Bergstrom. We are presented by Dawn Maddox Glacier Sotheby's International Realty. We will be back after this with Mary for our final segment. Okay, we're back with Mary Bergstrom.
So how do folks get a hold of you, Mary? If they have a product or a service they want to take into China, where do they get a hold of you?
Do a search online. You can look at me up at marybergstrom.com or at LinkedIn.
Okay, that's where they can find you. And how big an operation is your company? Do you keep it lean and mean?
Lean and mean.
That's
absolutely.
Good.
I had an office in China, but here in the U.S., I work with partners, but there's no need for me to be maintaining an office and a staff.
Good. I think that's very good in your particular case because people want you. You're the one who has the archive of experience. You're the one who spent, 6 years living there or so. I mean, they don't want to be handed off to somebody else. They want the real Mary Bergstrom experience.
For better or for worse, there's so many directions I could go with that.
No, I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying you have an experience that very few people, if anybody, has. I mean, you have been in the homes of Chinese families. You have talked with Chinese young people. This isn't something you have read or put together from somebody else. This is your firsthand knowledge and sensitivity to the market, and everything that I've heard from you resonates, honestly and truly. And I wouldn't think of anybody else to send a company to than someone, like yourself or you specifically, because of what you firsthand have been through.
Yeah, thank you.
So,
I think that it was a great experience and a really great opportunity, and taught me a lot about empathy and putting my own values aside to really understand and hear someone. So I think that that flexibility is really critical for anyone.
But you picked the most challenging market in the world to
tune right in.
Yeah, I mean to tune in on. I mean, it would be a lot easier to go to Ireland or someplace like that. I mean, you picked a very complex market, constantly changing. I always think of it as like a school of fish. All of a sudden, they're all headed in one direction, and then bam, they're headed in another direction.
But I think that that brings us back to the Montana point of view.
Sure.
I think that, I didn't go into it thinking, oh, this is going to be an easy thing to do. I went into it thinking this is going to be a really great challenge, and I couldn't think of a bigger challenge.
No, there's no bigger challenge. Unless you were going to go and do the consumer preferences on Mars.
Or find a good Chinese restaurant. Back to finding a good Chinese restaurant in Missoula.
I had to learn Chinese first.
Yes.
I speak Italian and French.
Yeah, no, it's a totally different experience.
Mary, in the final minute, top 5 things you miss about Missoula.
Ooh.
Beside the Bernice's. We already know that.
Well, you can say Bernice's. That's one. Do it.
No. I'm going to say hiking up the M.
Yes.
Floating down the river.
Yes.
Big Dipper ice cream.
Yes.
Butterfly herbs.
Yes.
And number one. The number one thing she misses most.
Being across town in 5 minutes or less.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Do you know, Mary, that we have Uber here now?
That's not necessary.
It is when you're looking for a cab at 1 a.m.
That's not necessary. Get a bike.
Get a bike. Yeah. That's true, though.
Right. Not when you're drunk and 2 o'clock in the morning come out of the Mo Club.
Well, Mary, you have been a delightful, delightful guest. Are you going to come and see us in person when you're here next time?
Absolutely.
Good. We'll do another show with you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, you are
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, you're a fun guest. All right, that was Mary Bergstrom.
Thank you, Mary.
Okay, thank you very much, Arnie. I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290, 101.5 FM, and newstalkkgvo.com.